So obviously there are going to be liquidity providers, those who are providing their assets, like, for this example, USDC, USDT. Now, assuming if they have got $5 billion in TVL.
The core idea of this smart debt is to essentially, instead of having the borrower borrowing just straight USDC and that's it, have the borrower accept to borrow essentially a volatile mix of USDC and USDT. So you will borrow and you will opt in for this smart debt. Now, what is interesting is that if a user, now this borrowing becomes liquidity, and if a user now wants to swap USDC to USDT, your debt will be used as a liquidity source. And so that means user is swapping USDC to USDT. What will happen is essentially against your debt, the user will repay the USDC if he's swapping USDC and will borrow USDT. So I'm anticipating that we will see some moves on this infrastructure by essentially players that are either in the DEX space but behind, or that are not in the DEX space and want to provide a DEX. And
welcome to Digital Dunya. Myself and Brice are back together again. This time we are going to go and discover about Fluid. Welcome to the show, Brice.
Hey, nice to be back again, and I'm very excited for this one. I know I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I think Fluid is probably one of them.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting episode, because the way we covered off the last one, which was Aerodrome, it felt like our energies were so elevated that it might come across that we are leaning towards Aerodrome, but it's not the case. So let's start with Fluid, another decentralized exchange. And what I've seen in my research is I see a very dynamic mix. So they're not on every EVM chain. They are very selective. They're only on 5 chains. And one of them is Plasma. So I won't even call them a chain as of now, right? In a way that, it's still on a private version. I don't see many users over there. So they are on Arbitrum based Ethereum, and I think Solana, if I'm not wrong. Is it?
Yes, through the they have like a partner there, Jupiter or whatever that is essentially distributing their tech under their umbrella.
Okay, cool. So practically Ethereum base and Arbitrum are the main place as of now. So tell us what makes Fluid different from Uniswap, Curve, MetaDEX, Aerodrome.
Well, actually, I will not tell you that just yet because I think it's good we take a step back, because Fluid is a different beast, you know. It to begin with, it wasn't a DEX. It wasn't even a protocol as you might picture it, because when it started, it was Instadapp, and it's actually a very old, legit team. They've been building since the super early days of DeFi, and essentially they were interface is a bit not making a middleware. They were providing a service on top to help you interact with other protocols, to help you manage compound, Aave, maker positions, and things like that. And they've been doing that for quite a few years before Fluid actually came to be. Fluid is a pretty recent thing. It's last year, I think, it launched. You probably checked the date before the show, so double check me, because I'm doing it from memory. But it's recent. It's recent for sure.
Yeah, and Instadapp is one that I discovered in 2021, and I could be wrong. Please correct me if I am. But there are 2 young Indian boys, brothers apparently, who started Instadapp, and then they transition into Fluid DEX. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, and Instadapp is still going strong. There are some. I mean, they rebranded it under a Fluid Lite product, but one of their core thing was this ETH vault, essentially, that they do leverage strategy on staked ETH for you. You just drop your ETH somewhere, and they do the cooking. It's still at almost 8% API right now, so it's one of the. Over time, I think it's one of the yield source on ETH that paid out the most yield ever seen on chain. Because the yield is good, but the amount are still very excellent. There is 2 billion in there right now still. So Instadapp, I don't know. We can check the DeFi Llama. If I don't know if Instadapp has a, because I got to admit I was not a user of Instadapp. So
I did
you
I did
did
use it in 2021. After that,
nice.
I used it for a brief time, and then I didn't use it again. But the challenge
Yeah.
with me is I
So
was
ooh,
late to the party, so
oh
I didn't
no.
have lots and lots of ETH to keep them idle. I always needed them to work for me more harder than 8%.
I'm sorry, mate. I opened the DeFi Llama and it melted the poor computer.
Oh yeah, I'll share it. Don't worry.
I should have used the other device. I'm sorry, I forgot for a second. I set up my Windows. For the next stream, we should be free of these
Here we go.
issues.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Are you seeing Fluid? Okay. So let's have a look. Instadapp.
I'm not even sure they still have it. I think it was all attached, but yeah, I think they just put everything under Fluid.
Yeah, I think so. So let's have a look.
But it doesn't include their Light Vault, or does it? No, it doesn't, because the Light Vault by itself has 2 billion TVL. So I think this is only Fluid Lending and Fluid DEX that we are seeing here. But I guess it's okay. The point is, Instadapp was widely used. It wasn't a small product at all. I don't have specific figures in head, but okay, I can attest that I remember seeing them well above the 10 billion TVL mark at some point. To give you some reference points, and we're not talking of a small shop. We're talking of something that was managing serious amount. And yeah, was quite recognized, respected, and appreciated by the users. And I guess that's also what made Fluid so interesting. Is they it doesn't come out of nowhere. They had this experience providing service to the lenders, so they had a very concrete understanding of what lenders were worrying about, what they wanted, what was their pain point, and so on. So yeah, Fluid came about last year, and I think another important point before we go into the specific is really to understand that they've architectured it as what they call a liquidity layer, and so the core idea is to kind of end this segregation that we have in DeFi, or your assets are either providing liquidity for swapping, or they're providing liquidity for lending, and those two things are completely separate, happening one on Uniswap and the other on Aave. And yes, okay, you can do some weird stuff like put a Uniswap LP as collateral on Aave, but they tried that and it didn't work so well. So essentially, everything is siloed, and from the get-go, Fluid was architecture design with this concept of, okay, we have this liquidity layer, that's our base. Every single asset that you put in Fluid goes into that liquidity layer, and then everything is kind of built as extension on top of that liquidity layer, interacting with it. And so the first extension, if we might call it like that, is the lending component. This is essentially isolated pair lending. So that would be, I don't know, ETH, USDC, for instance, or things that people are used to now with Morpho and so on. The lending by itself, I guess, wouldn't be the most exciting product. It's still, interesting features and so on. But what makes it so interesting, it's its connection, its interaction to the DEX layer of Fluid, the Fluid DEX. And particularly interesting is those two concepts that they came up with that are a true innovation in DeFi, and I still think they're not given enough credit, because those guys have engineered a new primitive, and a primitive without equivalent anywhere else in DeFi. And you know better than me, so you tell me, but as far as I understand, without equivalent in trad finance as well, the smart collateral and the smart debt, right? And yeah, so the core idea is that let's zoom in on smart collateral, on smart debt, because I think it's a bit more clear, but the mechanisms are similar. So the core idea of this smart collateral is that, okay, we were talking about this ETH USDC pair. Now, the reality is most people USDC, USDT, they don't care. It's pretty much the same for them, right? The both are worth $1 and have similar security assumptions. So the core idea of this smart debt is to essentially, instead of having the borrower borrowing just straight USDC and that's it, have the borrower accept to borrow essentially a volatile mix of USDC and USDT. So you will borrow and you will opt in for this smart debt. And I don't know, maybe at the time of the borrow, you want to borrow $100,000, you will get, I don't know, 70,000 USDC and 30,000 USDT, because that's the state of the pool at this moment. But no, what is interesting is that if a user know this borrowing becomes liquidity, and if a user now wants to swap USDC to USDT, your debt will be used as a liquidity source. And so that means user is swapping USDC to USDT. What will happen is essentially against your debt, the user will repay the USDC if he's swapping USDC and will borrow USDT. So essentially, he's making your debt evolve. But again, if you have assumptions on, I don't care, USDC, USDT, it's the same thing, then you're fine. It doesn't matter for you.
Before we carry forward, I just want to recap what I've understood is correct, right? So as a user, if I'm using Fluid, if I put in, say, 10 ETH in there, right? Say at $3,000 price, right? So that's $30,000. So as soon as I deposit, I get USDC, USDT in terms of a loan. Is that right? Is that what I understood?
If you want to borrow, yes, as a borrower, you will borrow. So it's an opt-in feature. You can also just borrow USDC and have a set amount of USDC that you need to repay, like a regular borrowing. But if you want and you're using those smart debt vault, you will essentially get your debt into this. Could be described as a USDC USDT LP token. That's how you get your debt essentially, because you you owe 100K. You just don't know at the state of repayment how much percent will be in USDC and how much percent will be in USDT, because it will depend of the fluctuations that are done.
So I'm going to just ask you a quick question. What's the incentive to borrow on a LP position instead of direct USDC or USDT?
Because it's pretty simple. It makes a debt productive. So now your debt is used as a liquidity source to process swaps, and that means you are getting a swap fee, which means essentially it offsets the cost of your borrow, reduce them at least. In some situations, it might even completely offset it, and you end up being paid to borrow. So from a borrower perspective, it's very compelling.
So, and that makes sense, right? So we've seen that kind of scenarios with looping in past where your debt could have been paid off 10 times and still more comes back to you in a way. So that part of concept I understand. I recap, I can put in 10 ETH, say 100 ETH, so that's $300,000 in valuation. I borrow 100,000 in LP, and basically I'm not using it. I'm using it as an investment. So basically I'm not getting that 100,000 to do something else. I'm basically borrowing for LPing. Is that right?
No. You get those $100,000.
Yeah,
Like a
but
regular borrow.
so if I use that to do something else in DeFi, how would I earn the fees?
But that's the beauty of it. So okay, yeah, I know it's a bit confusing. It's a bit weird. You come in, you put your ETH, you borrow against that vault. You will get, I don't know, let's say 50,000 USDC, 50,000 USDT. You go and you swap them for, I don't know, the Mega ETH and Aztec pre-sale that you wanted to invest in, and that's why you borrowed those assets. So those USDC, USDT are gone from your wallet. They're in your wallet and then they're gone. The trading thing happened on your debt, not on the stable you borrowed. The stable you borrowed are in your wallet. Fluid can touch them. You can even burn them if you want. So it's not them to access. What they can access is your debt that is within the protocol, and that debt is a mix of USDC and USDT. we said 50-50 right now, which can evolve. So if we take this situation you just borrowed, and now a user is doing a USDC to USDT swap, he might essentially unbalance your position towards a USDC. It will make the balance of your pool evolve between USDC and USDT. But essentially, it's this key concept of using a borrow to perform a swap, which is you see it also in Euler and other design, and quite often it's more efficient than just pooling liquidity to be able to perform those swaps. You have to understand that from the project perspective, that means right now, USDC, USDT, the biggest pool on mainnet is Fluid. It's not Curve, it's not Uniswap. They process about 50% of the volume on that pair, okay? So no, like they kill the game, literally. But in effect, they have zero liquidity there. They don't have any single dollar of someone providing liquidity as such, as you're used to, coming with a stable and depositing into a USDC, USDT pool. No, they don't have any of that. They just have people using various sets of collateral to borrow in a pair where smart debt is enabled on USDC, USDT. And essentially their liquidity is the total borrow as smart debt on USDC, USDT pair. That's where
So,
the TVL comes from.
so I'm going to ask basic because I think audience is going to want to understand the same thing again, right? So I've put in 100 ETH, right? So that 100 ETH that is as working as collateral. Do Fluid team basically actually use them to borrow USDC, USDT to give it to me, or how do they get that 100,000 in 50-50 USDC, USDT?
Oh no, yeah, of course your ETH is collateral, and as every single protocol, if the ETH price was to drop, you will be liquidated, your collateral is seized, and so on. The usual flow of lending applies here. The innovation, because we focus on the smart debt, is really on the debt side, where your debt, instead of being denominated in a single token like on Aave, where you borrow USDC, it is smart debt USDC USDT, and that means essentially picture it as an LP token of USDC and USDT, because that's essentially how it works. And then the balance might evolve, so you need to accept that uncertainty. But again, because it's done on correlated assets, people are fine accepting that uncertainty, and that's what enables and the DEX layer.
So that's really nicely put in, right? So the fundamental features of lending and borrowing applies: margin call, liquidation, interest rate. So that's all part of it, based on what I understand, right?
Yep.
And my follow-up question is: so where does that 100,000 that I'm borrowing comes from?
Oh, well, it's essentially coming from the liquidity layer. So that means it comes from other people that have deposited USDC or USDT in the protocol one way or another. They have other pairs, they have a lot of stablecoin pairs as well, where you can leverage, for instance, I don't know, SUSDE or Go. So all of this gives them access to a decent liquidity layer of stablecoin.
So as I understand, so they have got lending, as we spoke about Instadapp. That was their first project. They built on top of it DEX. So obviously there are going to be liquidity providers, those who are providing their assets, like for this example, USDC, USDT. Now, assuming if they have got $5 billion in TVL, they don't need actually 5 billion to facilitate the volume, right? They might only, because we have seen with Aerodrome, they've got TVL of about $600-700 million, but they generate insane amount of volume, right? So as I understand, would it be fair to say that because they have got such high liquidity in the protocol, they can use the smart logic in another way to make that LP position more beneficial for the borrowers as well as for the LPs?
Yeah, so right now it's smart collateral, smart debt, but indeed with Fluid V2, they hinted at other extensions of that liquidity layers coming up. I was just listening to DeFi Made Here talk at in Argentina right before our call, just to catch up to make sure I didn't miss anything. And he explicitly said that next year, in 5 to 10 additional extensions are expected to be released to the Fluid protocol.
This is insane because sorry, I got a little excited because with stablecoin, I'm still trying to wrap my head around, right? And I'm trying to understand it from a risk point of view, right? Because any looping, any derivative that we try and extrapolate from any position, be it LP or a collateral, right? It creates a chain of risks that needs to be managed. And with USDT, USDC, DAI, understand, right? There is risk, but it's not huge. And if 5 to 10 other assets comes in, it just magnifies the risk.
It's not assets, it's extensions. So, I mean, Fluid DEX is an extension. Another extension
Okay.
might be a Fluid Pendle. Or I don't know, you see what I mean? Or a fluid
Yes.
betting market that use your smart debt code. I don't know what they have in store, but literally anything is possible because you have to understand that essentially those guys, the key thing to get, if you get away from this call with one thing is, they found this simple magic trick to be able to source stable liquidity at zero effective cost. Any other project but Fluid is literally splurging money all around to attract stablecoins. Curve, people love to say it's the home of stablecoin and so on. Curve is just paying heavy incentives to have stablecoins on their platform, and they don't have so much anymore, and they have a very low share of the stablecoin volume overall nowadays. So that's a core innovation. And because you're able to source this liquidity at no effective cost, then you can do a lot of things with it. But also it makes it, it was pretty funny back in the days. There was Ecubo, another DEX we'll probably talk about some days because they are going in an interesting direction lately. But back then they were going in a pretty stupid direction, if we're honest, for anyone who follows, because essentially they were performing a race to the bottom on the fees of USDC, USDT pair. But they are regular DEX with incentives. So if you understand what I just said, you understand they were literally suiciding themselves. Because how can you compete with a guy that sources at zero when you're sourcing at something superior than zero, even if it's very close to zero? Even if you're the wizard of Oz of incentivization and you find a way to only pay guys 2%, you still have to pay those 2%. On the other side, they pay nothing because those guys, they reduce the cost of borrow by accepting this smart debt. So they don't need anything more. They don't need extra fluid sprinkled on top.
Well, it sounds really interesting because, as I understand, and I like to believe the liquidity that Fluid has been able to attract, they are capitalizing and optimizing the efficiency of that capital to the highest level in different forms, right? So that's so far what I understood. Am I right before we go further ahead?
No, that's correct. That's correct. It's definitely more optimized than any regular lending or DEX protocol.
That's interesting. Now, I'm going to ask you something quite interesting. I was looking at DeFi Llama before we jumped on this recording. I saw that they have generated close to 14-15 billion
Yep.
dollars in monthly revenue, monthly volume, and they are on par with Aerodrome. But when I see the revenue generation, they are not even a fraction of what Uniswap, Aero, or Curve is generating. Why is that gap?
It's mostly stemming from the fact of the assets that are traded, So we were really explicitly talking about correlated pairs because this is where the Fluix DEX V1 dominates, and those correlated pairs simply have a low fees per swap. You're not willing to pay 0.3% to swap USDC to USDT, but when you're buying, I don't know, the latest novel coin on Aerodrome, you might pay 2% fee per transaction. Or when they launch an ignition, that's a fee. So you can see, on the other hand, the stable swap is maybe 1 BPS. So that means, you need 200 stable swaps to make as much fees as one volatile, fancy, exotic token on Aero. So that's where the difference comes from. But yeah, we will talk about it probably after. But there is this Fluid V2. I was about to say that it's coming, but no, actually, it's already there. They ship the contract. They're live on mainnet. They're just kind of like slowly rolling it out. I don't think it's integrated in the UI yet. They're working on getting the routing from the aggregators and all of that. But essentially, within the coming weeks, depending on when you release the show, maybe even days, this Fluid V2 will be accessible. And one of the key focus of that V2 is to essentially better cater the DEX part for volatile pairs. So they are actively working on solving that blind spot, and it should be quite soon.
And just being devil's advocate over here, because Curve is similar on that trend. They do a lot like-to-like pairs. They've got huge volume, but again, their volume can't be similar to Uniswap or Aerodrome, because with Uniswap and Aerodrome, you pretty much end up trading anything, and the trading fees could go anywhere 0.3 to 2%, as you said. Even then, comparing with Curve, they are significantly less than Curve. So I completely understand that the asset they are specializing is like to like, so the fees are going to be less, but not comparing with now Aerodrome. If we compare with Curve, certain amount of variance I can still understand, because Curve has got a much more wider asset class, right? There are still some asset, but majority of their asset, I like to believe, fall in like-to-like scenario.
No, that's no longer true, actually, because you don't discount yield basis for Curve. The situation evolved because of yield basis. We're not processing a decent amount of volume on those Bitcoin pairs that are Bitcoin stable pairs, so volatile. So they gather a decent amount of fees there also. So that might explain the difference you're seeing. And then after we can show some Fluid screen share to get a bit deeper into those smart depth, smart collateral, and so on.
Yep. So Curve Finance yield basis started recently, I think last 2 months, right? So if I'm looking at, let's go.
Yeah, zoom in a bit. Yeah, go after all the trauma, the FTX, and so on.
So see,
yeah, you're on
just for
TVL,
20.
yeah. But take the fees, I think you will have a more interesting picture. The fees definitely did a pickup since yield basis.
Okay, let's look at fees.
You can see a little uptrend at the end, right?
Yep.
Since roughly October.
Yep. So here, yeah, it's getting getting much bigger. So since July, it's shooting up. Let's look at Fluid monthly fees. So they are generating roughly around
10 million
so
a month.
10. Yeah, for last.
About.
Yeah, if we average it out for last 4 months, it's about 10 million. And with Curve Finance,
they're already not far, Curve Finance annualized fee is like maybe 50% above Fluid right now. You do have to keep in mind that Curve, just like Uniswap, really went spray and pray with their cross-chain strategy. So I don't know how many chains, but 20 something or something like that, Versus, as we were saying, for Fluid, you were mentioning essentially Fluid is mainnet, is Arbitrum. They're on Base, but they didn't really focus on Base because of Aerodrome and Plasma. So Fluid is really 3 chain that they actually care about: mainnet, Plasma, Arb. And all those 3 chain, they obliterated the stable volume. They are way above anyone else.
True, and we can see the fees, right? So you're right. Curve has been pretty much jumping up on back of yield basis, whereas Fluid is more constant around that $8 to $10 million mark monthly in fee generation. Cool. No, that's good. That makes sense. And why are they only looking like, that was my next question. Thank you for giving it to me without asking. Why are they not on? I mean, that does not make sense that because of Aerodrome, if they have got amazing product, it does not matter. Uh, if they are not like, why should not they be focusing on base? Because Arbitrum, you and I both know, compared to what 2 years ago, there are hardly any users. There could be big whales with big park money over there, but regular daily usage is not that high.
I think it was a matter of balancing between grabbing markets, demonstrating the viability of the product, but also not accumulating too much legacy. Because, by the time Fluid Text V1 was out and getting traction, they were already working on V2 and knowing it was coming rather shortly. Again, Fluid is 1 year old and the V2 is already there. So it's not like Uniswap where you wait maybe 3 years, 4 years between two versions. You see what I mean? So I think
Yeah.
that's like kind of a BT logic almost like, hey, do we want to focus on base? No, and like put efforts to do BD there with the projects and whatsoever so that we can grab some market share. And then 3 months from now, we have to migrate all those guys to V2 and kind of start from scratch again. Or maybe we just, we go where there is an open field. We grab the land there because it's easy. And then with V2, we will go in full world conquest mode and total domination. You see what I mean? I think that's kind of how they see it. And that kind of makes sense that they went on Arbitrum. Arbitrum, you have no, it's a green space in terms of DEX. You have Uniswap, and that's it. All the V33 there exploded and were poorly designed to begin with. And you really don't have much. You have Curve, okay, like Curve is on every chain, but it's not getting much traction. So it was a really open field for them. And I think that's an important factor is the speed at which they reach their volume. It's like within weeks of launching on Arbitrum, they were the dominant route for stable trading. Weeks, not months, weeks. And even in terms of total volume process, I think it was one of the fastest DEX to cross the volume milestone of 10 billion, 100 billion, and so on. So you
And
really
I
see
think,
that in the
yeah,
data.
and that makes sense, from strategic point of view, right? As you said, Arbitrum was green. So apart from Uniswap, RMZ, we both have known about it. Nothing much to say about that. Uh, the only second one that I can think of worthwhile mentioning would be Camelot. But again, I don't think it's it's on the scale or size that it could pose as a threat. So when they came in Fluid last year, it was pretty much like bang, 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 and they are ruling the roost.
Yep. Yeah, and Camelot is more focused on, the Arbitrum ecosystem token, the volatile tokens, being the home of like the native token liquidity and so on. But they don't really have what it takes to. Nobody has what it takes to compete against Fluid on stable correlated swap. It's clearly as simple as that. Nobody. Because again, you go back to this thing. Okay, Camelot wants to be competitive on USDC, USDT. What are they gonna do? Well, they're gonna sprinkle some of their Grail token on the USDT, USDT LP, and maybe attract a few million TVR. But if Fluid wants to take this market, they will just open a vault with smart debt, USDC, USDT, put low fees on the swap, and obliterate the root. You can't compete.
I thank you, first of all, because I had really limited understanding about Fluid. I knew about their Instadapp days as a lending protocol. I used it, as I mentioned to you in part. Then I knew when they launched last year, the tech was really talked about on Twitter, right? So that's where I got it on my attention. Never used it, but based on what I've learned today from you, I think it is something that will be on my radar. But
Yes.
give me top three reasons for why V2 Fluid could be the most interesting development in next 6 months.
Yes, sure. So the way current Fluid works is a bit in a curve style, I want to say, in the sense that they are managing your liquidity. End of the story. So, when you are East collateral, you borrow USDC, USDT. smart debt. You accept that it will be a volatile mix. We've been over this, but you don't choose the parameterization of that liquidity. It's Fluid managing it for you, just like when you deposit in a Curve pool, that's done. Curve manage it for you, versus Uniswap V3, you pick your concentration, your range, it's up to you, and your fees. And that's kind of one of the core idea of this V2 DEX is that they will enable essentially you to manage how you want to distribute that liquidity, concentrate it, and so on. So it will enable much more advanced strategy. It will be pretty complex, to be honest, because they also talk about stuff. Another important feature is this cross-collateral. So you're going to be able to use different collateral. Just like you can, on Aave, you can put Bitcoin and Ether to borrow USDC. On Fluid, it's isolated pair so far. You put ETH to borrow some stable. If you want to use Bitcoin as collateral, you will open another vault where you put what Bitcoin and you borrow whatever. So they have things at this level to enable this cross collateralization. And then there is quite a few improvement at the infrastructure level, where they're essentially catching up with the more advanced infra. So there was this one of the big innovation with Uniswap before was this what they call the flash accounting, where essentially it's pretty technical and logistics, but it's essentially kind of minimizing what goes back to the chain as much as possible, and trying to internalize the flow as much as they can. So it's like gas optimization and things to that regard. But really, I think the core novelty will be this the customizability of the liquidity, the cross-collateralization, and then the rest of the innovation will come from those additional layers. Because again, that's not small. We just talked about how Fluid DEX literally in few weeks destroyed the whole correlated asset game, redefined it to the point that nobody can compete with it. That was Fluid DEX, one extension of the Fluid liquidity layer. They mentioned 5 to 10 coming next year. And again, you have to keep in mind that they're able to source correlated assets at no cost. They can do a lot of things with that, a lot of things, because they have this huge liquidity source. So we'll see. Myself, I'm not privy to what's coming up, so I can tell you more. But I think those are the highlights from V2. Let me check. I had some notes from the conference, but no, I think that's the main points, that he mentioned explicitly. And it goes with the customization of liquidity, but they mention also these range orders. So you can customize your liquidity range order. But the funny thing is you can do it on both the debt side and the collateral side. Because I guess a concept we haven't so much touched on yet, but this smart debt that we were talking about, it works also on the collateral side, potentially, for vaults that have it enabled, and they call it smart collateral. And I will give you what I think is the most concrete example of this, and the best is simply gold. Okay, you like gold, you want to use gold as a collateral. I think you have it on Aave, is it the Tether or the Pax Gold? I think you have the Tether Gold on Aave as collateral now, or something like that. So you can go the good old way on Aave. You'll put your XOT as collateral. You will pay 7-8% volatile to borrow USDC. Your collateral will earn you peanuts. And anyway, if it earns you something, Aave will jank up the reserve factor to 50% to rob you of any earnings, like they're doing right now on the Bitcoin collateral on mainnet. It's a total scam that is not denounced enough. So I take a second to do it because it's insane. Like 50%, half of it. It's robbery, armed robbery. Anyway, it's done. On Fluid, instead of getting robbed, you can, for instance, let's stay on Bitcoin. Maybe you use a vault that has smart collateral, Coinbase Bitcoin, Wrap Bitcoin, to borrow your USDC. No, your collateral is a liquidity source. That means user swapping between Coinbase Bitcoin and Wrap Bitcoin are potentially routed through your collateral, and you are earning fees out of it. So that makes a collateral productive. And those two can be together. You can have a smart collateral, smart debt vault. So you can picture something like, let's stay on Bitcoin, Bitcoin Coinbase Bitcoin collateral. So you're a liquidity provider on those two, borrowing USDC, USDT smart debt. So do you realize like the level of optimization versus an Aave? Aave, Bitcoin collateral, whatever yield you make, they destroy it anyway because they seize all of it from you, and it makes no yield to begin with because nobody borrows Bitcoin on Aave. On the dev side, you just borrow pure USDC and you're just paying 7% or 8 or whatever is the volatile rate right now. Now you go on Fluid. Your collateral is liquidity source, it's earning. Your debt is liquidity source, it's earning. So the difference in effective cost of borrowing are insane. Okay, I can give you a concrete example. I use it, for instance, on the gold. I'm turned a bit of a gold bug last year. It
Good
was good
timing.
timing. Yeah. And so, I'm using this Pax Gold, Tether Gold, Smart Collateral Vault. And that means my gold, on average, since inception, I put here, I've been earning me 3%. Okay, I make yield on my gold on chain. It's literally, I think Fluid is pretty much one of the only places where you can say you're doing that right now. So this is quite insane, quite efficient, and it's poised for great growth in my perspective.
So, summing it up, before I go on to our last part, which is tokenomics. So, smart collateral, smart LPs, the difference so rightly highlighted, right? With Uniswap, Aerodrome. Now with Aerodrome, they have got autopilot that we spoke about before we started recording. So that's kind of taking a lot of activity away from users because most of them don't have that skill to work on concentrated liquidity. With Curve, it comes inbuilt, so set and forget model. As a user, you don't have to do anything. And Fluid is working same way with LP, and likely in future it might be similar for using collateral as well. Have I got that right so far?
Yes, it would just be more options for the users. Essentially, they can still go the old way where Fluid is managing the liquidity concentration, or if they are more sophisticated users and they want to define their own range, they can also do that. So overall, it will just give more tools to sophisticated players. I don't expect, newbies to be using a customized range or the smart depth. It's a bit deep.
It's forget about newbies. Most financial people don't have the skills to do that. I can tell you that from my experience, right? So,
Probably.
and I've got no shame in sharing that because it takes time to learn and it's costly to learn sometimes. So you don't want to make mistakes, right? Because you actually end up paying money from your own pocket to learn those. So now, last part, before I go into tokenomics of Fluid, is there anything else you want to cover before we move there?
I mean, there are a lot of consequences to that we barely started to see the impact of. But for instance, one of the things I'm expected to see at some point, maybe I shouldn't spit it out openly, but it's okay, is for projects providing liquidity on their own correlated assets, Fluid is also an interesting venue to be, because essentially with a smart depth, smart collateral vault on the same assets, you can leverage your own liquidity close to 40x. That means if a project has, for instance, $1 million set aside that they want to supply liquidity on the stablecoin with, instead of using them as incentives like they would do in the past, or just supply them in a, Uniswap position, maybe they work with the Fluid team to have a smart depth, smart collateral vault on their pair. They deposit it here and they loop it up. And now all of that debt is liquidity, all of that collateral is liquidity. And so essentially they just amplified massively their own liquidity. So you potentially could find projects that will go the route of simply not having external liquidity providers anymore, but just finding ways to capture some fees, some revenues, and leverage it up on Fluid to enable to process the trade just through the smart depth and smart collateral. I think this is an obvious path, and I'm confident in it simply because, again, it's more efficient. So, efficiency win eventually. Markets can be a bit irrational and stupid, but the bottom line always hit you one way or another.
And I think we can move forward with one thing locking in, because I know that Q2. Oh, sorry. Q2 of 2026 is when MetaDEX 3 with Aerodrome comes in. And I think it would be a good time to circle back, most likely with Fluid 2 as well. So we can do a recap on both of them, just to give, we have already laid the premise, right? So we can build on this premise and take it forward.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, maybe just the tokenomics question, because we didn't touch it. But honestly, it's the least interesting part of Fluid right now. Yeah.
You stole the thunder away from my question by answering that with that question.
No, I can go a bit deeper, but essentially, if we're honest, tokenomics is close to nil right now. There is no tokenomics.
Yeah.
If you ask the Fluid guys, they will tell you something like, oh, as a Fluid holder, you have a claim on the treasury assets that are this much. You just have to make a proposal, and then you can do whatever. Even if you, you have the full control. If you manage to convince the Fluid holder, maybe you can even put $10 million to yourself, whatever. But I think both you and I understand this is not a tokenomics. This is some, hey, we have some utility. This utility is governance. We're not a useless token. Honestly, right now, people are buying the Fluid token because they see this immense potential, and they understand that at some point, the gap will be filled. And they did start to fill the gap. I have to be honest on that front. I don't really like so much the mechanism used, but why not? Where they had this proposal on the Fluid governance a few months ago now, that was essentially, if the revenues was above 10 million, they would start to perform buybacks. Buybacks and burn, or just buyback? I'm not sure. Buybacks at least. The burn part, I'm not certain. And so this threshold of revenue has been crossed, and therefore the buybacks have started. So they have that going for the Fluid token. But that's about it for now. And I haven't heard something about the V2 that would change it, but I guess it could surprise us, with one of those extensions that will involve Fluid in some ways. I don't know.
Well, on that nice note, without asking question, but still getting the punchline, and I agree with that. Their tokenomics is really, really poor compared to the technology they have, right? And my understanding tells me, over the years, you may have the best tech, but tokenomics plays a huge part in engagement. So wrong tokenomics, amazing tech will always be a challenge, unless and until they fix the tokenomics. Otherwise, a decent tech with amazing tokenomics will always front run them because of the user experience.
Yeah, but then I guess, the good news is it's not a protocol like Curve, where the token is a core part of the system. Literally, the protocol doesn't need at all the token to function. So the fact that there is no tokenomics doesn't impact negatively the protocol. At least there's that. But yeah, of course, I agree with you. It's there's no scenario where it wouldn't be better to have tokenomics. I imagine the guys are aware, they're working on it. It's a matter of, like, essentially, if you're getting into Fluid token right now, you're kind of placing a bet on that, a double bet, a bet that the Fluid will keep growing. I guess it's not so much of a bet at this point, but what is more of a bet than a gamble is that eventually the token will be connected to that growth and able to amplify it, see some revenue from it. I don't know what form it will take, but have something that is a bit more IRO-like, like we were saying about ownership. Right now, I don't feel I am a Fluid holder, so I'm filling my own bag like a moron, but it's okay. And it's a decent bag, because you can tell I have strong conviction there. But yeah, something a bit more IRO-like, something where I'm not saying they need Gaussian whatsoever, but ownership. As a Fluid holder, I can direct where the growth is going and capture some of those revenues. I think that's the end game. The exact form it will take, I don't know. You and I will both be surprised, I guess.
On that wonderful note, come to an end of this wonderful episode, number 5 of our
Already.
DEX history.
Essentially, I find it to be a good match, like you have Ekubo's tech and you have Sushi's pump whatever capacity, awareness capacities, let's call them like that. So that might give lead to a resurgence of sushi. I don't know. It's maybe it's not sufficient. Depends of what they do with them. But I think it's definitely potentially something to keep on an eye on.
Okay, so let me wrap this up, and then we can continue while it's uploading for 5 minutes. Thank you again, Brice. This was an amazing learning curve for myself as well. Fluid is, out of all the 4 episodes, most lightweight for me from a knowledge point of view. So I've learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure our audience will walk away getting to know a lot about Fluid as well. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, that's it. Go dig Fluid. It's worthwhile. It's probably one of the most interesting piece of DeFi infrastructure right now. And if you intend to understand what's happening in the space and you have no understanding of Fluid, you are behind.
Lovely. Thank you, friends. We'll be back soon with another episode of Origin of DeFi. See ya.